Hey, welcome to Power Chat TV. I am running music. Today we are talking to Heather Kaputalamba, a survivor of cancer. She's a beautiful young lady. She's here to tell us a story of what she's been through and what she has done and how she's coping with the whole surviving cancer. We are here in East London, Ilford. Come and see where we're going to be talking to Heather, and we shall see you in the salon. Come with me, and we shall see you in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Power Chat TV. We are in Real Friends salon here in Ilford, and we are grateful that they've given us the opportunity to use their salon. So we would like to thank the management here. However, they are now going to be our sponsors. We now have sponsors for Power Chat TV, and we cannot wait to bring you more information on Real Friends salon here in Ilford. As I had done the introduction before, I am with Heather Kaputalamba. Heather Kaputalamba is a female who, female. Heather Kaputalamba has a very, very powerful story that she has offered herself to tell the story. And this is a story about living with cancer, surviving cancer, the treatment of cancer, I'll say us as Africans, we have a problem in terms of accepting some things and talking about some things and being open about some things. And Heather has offered the opportunity for people out there to at least know what's really going on living with cancer and going through the treatment. Anyway, Heather, welcome to Power Chat TV.
Thanks, Ronnie. It's good to be here.
Fantastic. Okay, Heather. First of all, before we get too much into what we're going to be talking about today, can you give us a brief a brief description about yourself?
Yes.
Not even description, I'll say something that is gonna get our people out there who are watching to.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, Ronnie, I am 39 years young. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm female, as you can see, and I'm here in the UK living with breast cancer.
Okay. Now, before we get into the whole thing with the breast cancer, how long have you been living with the breast cancer?
With the breast cancer. So I was diagnosed in July 2013. Was my first diagnosis, and I was diagnosed with breast cancer in the right breast. I've then had very close monitoring and treatment over the last 4 years, and unfortunately I had another diagnosis of breast cancer in the left breast in August last year, 2017. So it was coming up to the 4th year of being all clear when I found another lump. So I've had two diagnoses of breast cancer within 4 years of each other, really.
Okay. I'm not going to go into how you felt like when you found out. However, I'm going to ask, when you first found out, how was the experience in terms of coping with what you'd found out, and also the experience you had informing your family members?
Okay, all right. Well, I remember finding out, so I think it's important for me to first, set out for the guys watching that when I found out about my breast cancer, it wasn't through a series of being sick or, feeling unwell or pain, etc. Because I think that's important, because a lot of people would assume that, leading up to a diagnosis of cancer, you would be in some sort of pain or you'd have some sort of symptoms. Really and truly speaking, the only symptoms I had were, lumps that I think most, females feel within the breast. Breasts are lumpy anyway. But my lumps had just been irking me because they were a little bit harder than I think they should have been, and most importantly, they weren't moving. So when I was feeling them, they weren't moving, and off a whim, really, I went and I saw my GP. The GP was very blasé in the first diagnosis because my age, My family history that I'd reported wasn't, I wasn't anticipating a breast cancer diagnosis. And when I first went to the breast clinic, which is where you get your checks done, I went first time with my sister. She's a younger sister of mine. We'd driven really, really long hours from where I now currently live in Cambridge to go to Manchester for the GP there. And when I got there, I remember being told I had, it's a process actually, so they don't tell you on the day. But in hindsight, I can see now that they follow the same process. So what happened was I first went to the clinic and then had a scan and a biopsy. Then they send you away and they ask you to come back with the results. And on the day that I went to pick up the results, I was with my young sister and a friend, a close friend that I trust with these things. I hadn't actually told my mum that I'd even gone for the initial, like a diagnosis.
Screening?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had not told her. I was going through this with my sister and my friend. And I remember hearing the news and it feeling so surreal, really. It was almost like an out-of-body experience. I was a little bit confused because I wasn't unwell, but I also had these red flags that just said, oh my goodness, I've got cancer. And I had a myriad of things going through my mind, including dreading missing TV shows that were currently on a break.
Okay.
My strategy being I just need to get through this. And I remember at the time I used to like the TV program called Scandal. It had just gone on a break and I was anxious, to find out what would happen
Next,
with it. Yeah.
Okay.
But the feeling was surreal. I didn't believe it was happening to me. But most importantly, the only person I had told at that point, or the only two people I told at that point, were a friend and my sister. And then I just had to then process how I would tell my family. So those were the feelings at the time. Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, you've given us a good information in terms of how you found out and what's going on. In terms of now you've picked up the results and they've told you that you've got it. What we want to tell people out there is what made you do the check? Because you said you felt the lump.
Yes. Yeah.
And what, apart from the lump, would you have done any checkups? So would you have done anything afterwards?
Absolutely nothing. I wouldn't have done anything, and I'll tell you for why. So I live in a first world country. When you're registering with your GP, they ask you a myriad of questions, don't they? Is there a family history of heart disease? I would put no. Is there a family history of cancer? I would put no. Is there a family history of blood pressure? I would put yes, because every African family, they feel blood pressure and people are very open about it. But all of my checks would be no. And from the limited information that I knew about cancer, I knew it was hereditary. I didn't see or know or hear anyone in the family ever, referring to it. So I would have never gone to check. And the only reason I felt compelled to go was because I had an English friend at the time who had been going through her own cancer battle, I suppose maybe for 3 or 4 years before I got diagnosed. And she passed away in the February 2013. And I was devastated. I was, confused. She died before she was 40 as well. And looking at her situation, there was no family history in her family of cancer. And she could, confidently say that because there's lots of medical history. If you're born and bred in the first world, you know, there's medical history, ancestral history that is documented.
So we'll then go back to your history. Is
Yes.
there anyone in your family who...
And would you believe it? Yes, there is.
Okay.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
I have got aunties, my father's sister, who was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer, similar kind, in her 40s. She is now, I think, nearing 70 years of age. Fortunately, my father is a doctor, so he's American trained, and they will have dealt with the cancer. And I had my first mastectomy, chemotherapy, etc. But even, you know, like having a dad that is medical, we didn't talk about these things. And when I got diagnosed, I put a call into my dad to tell him the news. And it was the first word of comfort was he said to me, "Oh, you know, your auntie, she has had breast cancer and has been treated. And this is a woman I've known most of my life and had absolutely no idea.
Okay.
Absolutely no idea.
Okay.
She had gone through, you know, like a cancer story herself.
Yeah.
Subsequently, I've had cousins, all paternal at the moment. My mom's side of the family, I don't know.
Okay.
We're aware of it. We're talking about it now, but I don't know anyone that has had cancer since. Yeah, but that's an amazing story right there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is amazing. Yeah. Now, do you feel like we as Africans fail to discuss things that could probably save a lot more lives?
Do you know what, Ronnie? Up until I had experience here, I would have said to you, oh, you know, Africans are very emotional. We show a lot of emotion. When we're happy, we're very happy, etc. But you're absolutely right. There is a lot, particularly around things like ill health and stuff like that. I think across most African, you know, like cultures, people take ill health as a sign of being cursed, maybe. Or that, you know, the spirits are not happy with you, and we don't talk about any sort of health really, or any sort of ill health. I mentioned blood pressure at the beginning. I think that's become like an accepted illness within the African community, but for things like cancer, certainly. I can tell you that until I had my diagnosis, I didn't know anyone. I didn't know any other African person with a cancer diagnosis. It's always been in my mind from wherever you know, like that seed has been planted. It's always been a Western disease. You know, people don't talk about it. People talk about HIV, but it's only because HIV in Africa was really quite publicized, I think, isn't it? But even the people that suffer it almost suffer it in silence. People are not asking for help or seeking treatment or being exposed to treatment until it's either too late, because of that taboo within our culture of not being able to talk about illness.
That's right. Yes, it is a taboo, and the reason why we're doing this broadcast today is to make sure that people talk about things that are happening in their lives.
Absolutely.
We're going to go back to the culture part of it again.
Yeah.
Now, some people believe that some people have passed away, unfortunately, due to lack of understanding, due to lack of knowledge. And did people come and talk to you about things like, or did they blame your history, or did you have people talk about, so maybe let's go to church?
Yes.
And let's pray about it.
Yeah.
Or did you have a lot of that, rather than saying, okay, now let's really go for the treatment, let's go for the treatment way, or go to the spiritual way?
Absolutely. You know, I'm probably one of the more fortunate people, because I come from a family where we've got doctors and nurses, etc. But you're absolutely right, Ronnie. The most help for myself that people give me is to pray. Put it in God's hands. Everyone says all will be fine. Put it in God's hands. And it takes some almost like going against your culture, really, to say, yes, I can put prayer in God's hands, but God is only going to give me strength. What he's done is he's put tools and people and medication on this earth for you to use and help yourself, really, when you get these things. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The rhetoric really is, are you going to church? And I'm embarrassed to say, I do know God, I do know church, but I don't go to church that often. It's easy sometimes for people to almost say, well, actually, you haven't been going to church, Heather. You're now being faced with this difficulty. You must start going to church. Do you know what I mean? And it's a controversial thing to say, I think, but a lot of Africans are putting church as the solution for everything, when actually what they're doing is they're ignoring their surroundings, they're ignoring medical help. I don't know whether sometimes church hinders people going to find help and talk about things, because the emphasis of church is it's between me and my God, isn't it? So hopefully people are not sat there suffering, praying, because actually in order to get help with some of these complex diseases that we haven't talked about, you've got to go to church and go to the hospitals as well.
Combine the two.
Combine the two, absolutely.
Definitely. Now we're going to go back to your father.
Yes.
Now you've told your father. How did your mother take it?
Okay.
And how is she taking it currently now as well?
Yeah. Okay. So perhaps a little bit of a backstory. My parents are not married. So my mum raised me in a different country, in Zimbabwe, as a single mum. And my dad's a doctor in Malawi, but I've always known my dad. So I've visited my dad. I have a really good relationship with my dad. So I can talk, if I've got anything medical going on. In fact, he loves it. He loves, having the call and talking me through these things. So and I'll tell you in the sequence in which it happened, really, because I'm with my mum here in the UK. So my mum, and I've chosen to have my treatment close to my mum as well. And in hindsight, it's the best thing that I did, really, because I've seen my mum going through the processes. So when I first sat her down to tell her it was cancer, she had two reactions. One was, we've got to start praying. We've got to start praying, Heather. You are not going to church. We need to start, racking up those Sundays and going to church.
Okay, yeah.
And the other one that sticks in my brain was, let's not tell anyone. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell family. Don't tell friends. Let's deal with this within the unit of the immediate family, of which it's my sister. She would have been comfortable in me letting some close friends that she trusts as well know, but her first instinct was not to tell anyone. And it's been a journey with Mum, because not only has she lived through the 4 years of the continual treatment, afterwards all of the operations, the medication, all of it. She's then had to go through a second iteration where, I've had the second diagnosis. And I think it's probably been harder for my mum to process. We quickly, I guess because of my nature, and because I've surrounded myself, I've welcomed, Western friends into my life. I've got really, really good friends from an African background as well. I was happy to share. I mean, I've always had this ethos of, if you can tell many people your problem, someone in there is going to have a really, really good answer to the solution. And I remember saying to my mum, no, Mum, what struck me actually was when she said to me, don't tell anyone. I went through a really thought process because I thought to myself, oh, why is mum embarrassed about me? It's not my fault that I have cancer. I know perhaps if it had been an HIV diagnosis and she'd said to me, don't tell anyone, I could almost understand that because the perception, isn't it, with HIV is you've done something that results in you having HIV. With the cancer thing, I didn't feel responsible, and I remember saying to her, "Well, no, Mum, why shouldn't I tell anyone?" And then she said, and yes, my memory does serve me correctly. She didn't want people to know. She referenced the spirits. Sometimes you've got to go through these things. Vadzimu is what we call them in Shona. You don't want to upset the spirits. There may be an answer. It might be a lesson for yourself. Don't tell anyone. Let's just go through this on our own. But I started telling friends. I started telling family, and that action of telling people, actually, I remember. From when I went for my first GP's appointment to when I had my first mastectomy, which is when they remove the breast, it was actually 2 weeks. And within those 2 weeks, I had family and friends. There was always someone at the house. So I've got a fairly extensive family here in the UK, all over the UK. I had family coming to, sit with me. We were, jokes. There was camaraderie and, family and fellowship at the house. And in hindsight, I mean, I've spoken to my cousins. They tell me that my mum was absolutely heartbroken the first time round. She never showed it to me, to my face. But equally, she had, my cousins that she could talk to, she could fall back on, etc. I think the second time round, it's hit us all again, possibly worse than the first time.
So how is it affecting your personal
life?
Yeah.
Do you know what? I'd love to sit here and say to you, life has continued. And in a lot of aspects, it has. So because I got my treatment whilst I was well and strong, I was able to go back to work pretty much immediately. So work has never really been affected in those instances.
So you're still working
I'm
now?
Still working, absolutely, still working. The first diagnosis, I went back to work within about 6 weeks. And again, that just tells you how important it is to diagnose early, really. And that's when I probably had my most aggressive treatment. So I had a mastectomy and radiation therapy. But within 6 weeks, I was ready to go back to work, and I went back to work full time. This second time round, I've just scaled my hours back a little bit. So I'm working. It's a full-time job, but at the moment I'm just doing, a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so 3 days a week. Right. In terms of having fun, do you know what? Actually, there's something to be said, isn't there, about having such a serious disease diagnosed. I make sure that I make time for fun. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I've done things within the last 5 years.
Sure, yeah.
Towards last year, obviously it had been 4 years that my treatment seemed to be working, and I had decided that I was going to have a child last year. I wasn't in a relationship. I was going to do it on my own. And when I got diagnosed with the second set of breast cancer in August, I was shocked. I was disappointed because I already had this plan to have children, and I delayed having chemotherapy because I wanted to harvest my eggs.
Eggs, yeah.
And the reason for doing that is because the chemotherapy was likely, because of my age, was likely to have an adverse effect on the ovaries. As it so happened, I started chemo in November, and unfortunately, again, due to medical conditions that I would have never anticipated, I was only able to have the one, the one dose of chemo. It was supposed to be 6 doses. So I've had just the one dose of chemotherapy. I don't know, therefore, whether my ovaries work or they don't work.
Okay, yep.
But I'd love to have children.
Yep.
It's a regret. I mean, if I look back now, all of those times in your 20s and your 30s where you've been extra careful, I'd perhaps go back and change that. But it's one of the major regrets. Yeah.
Okay. Now we're gonna jump into still the same thing, but we're gonna change the goalpost again. Have you considered alternative in terms of medication? Because obviously there's a lot of things you look into.
Yes.
And you get people offering you alternatives. You get this advice and that advice. Have you considered alternative medication?
The honest answer to you, I use alternative medication as well as conventional medication. So my advice would be, if anyone else was going through this. In fact, let me not call it advice. The thing that made me, able to go through my cancer treatment was because when I first got diagnosed, immediately in my mind, I thought to myself, I will do everything that these oncologists and these surgeons, advise that you do. Because I tell you what, actually, a lot of times when people get diagnosed with breast cancer, you've got loads of options. They can, if your main goal is to try and preserve your breasts. So there's things that you can do to shrink tumors. There's things that you can do to, almost keep your womanhood if you want. But at the time, my surgeon was advising that removing the breast was the way to go. I got it removed. I was given, a dose of medication. I took that. I've always been trusting of, Western medication.
The medication,
yes.
Okay. So you've, because you said you're combining the two. You're gonna get to it.
I'll get to it. It's not really a combination of the two, because now that my family and my friends, etc., are talking about it. Now, I have reports from people back at home that there's a root here that's known to be really, really good for cancer. I'll take it. Or, try and put this in your diet. I'll take it. Recently, I think there has been reports that I've bought into. And really, this isn't something that I've learned from home. It's something that I've learned whilst reading around. An extract from turmeric called curcumin. As an extract. I've seen a few anecdotal people that have said it has cured cancer. I take that. There's also cannabidiol, which is like an extract from cannabis. As a concentrated oil. I take that as well. But I do that with my oncologist's knowledge, because actually the main drugs that I think are treating me are the the conventional medication. And I tell my oncologist that this is what I'm doing in case they know of any contradictions with the medication. Yeah.
And do they encourage you to do? Or they're like,
they encourage me to do it. I mean, every time my oncologist sees me, she's very happy with the I mean,
I have to say you're looking quite healthy, quite still looking beautiful and looking great. And we can't say anything has changed really.
No.
I did not know you previously, but from the appearance, you look quite good.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if we finished the second medication.
Oh, the medication, and it's just things like I'd like to be healthier with my eating, but you can't ignore KFC and Domino's pizza now and again.
That's one of the questions I'm going to ask. Have you had to dramatically change your diet?
Do you know what? And it's ironic. Before I got my diagnosis, I was super healthy. So I ate very well. I exercised, etc. After my diagnosis now, I'm not as healthy as I used to be, mostly because, the challenges with energy for exercise. But also sometimes I think to myself, do I really want to, withhold myself from that KFC chicken? Do I really not want to eat that Chinese chicken? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But with regards to, I've always eaten very well, so I'll try and make sure, I'll stray a little bit from the good diet, but I'll always bring myself to making sure I've got loads of greens, loads of garlic, and presumably that's really, really good for your health and your immune system as well.
Garlic, yeah, definitely garlic.
Garlic, yeah.
Thank you for that. We're going to go back to traditions and norms and things like that. As Africans, again, back to Africans. Okay, let's go as black people, because I think it affects the Caribbean.
I think you're probably right.
Just general black people in generally. Do you find that we have a massive taboo again? And I know we have discussed it a bit, but we have a massive taboo in terms of discussing things, especially with family, because you can find some family members, the closest, say for instance, what your mum had said, let's keep it within us.
Absolutely.
So it's just you and that's it. So say for instance, I'm not saying it's going to happen. Say for instance, the cancer comes in and then, life was no longer there.
Yes.
I mean, I was going to ask another question is, have you contemplated, say for instance, if your life would end kind of thing because of the cancer? I'm sure all those thoughts have come to you.
Yes.
I've come to your mind. However, the reason we're asking this because some family members are told in the last minute, or some family members are told in the time of death, for instance, and then you go, I didn't know, maybe I could have done something, because there's always something someone knows or can do. I don't know. I just feel like we keep things too much within ourselves or within the closest
do you know why that
members.
is, Ronnie? I think it's because even within our own families, people cannot trust that family members are always wishing you well, right? So a lot of people don't want to discuss, like things like cancer, etc., because the perception is that if I tell someone, the bad luck is highlighted, or they can use something like that. You're absolutely right. As black people, we just don't like to share these things. But going back to your point about having to deal with my own mortality, and it's a day-to-day struggle, to be perfectly honest. A lot of the times I'm frustrated because I'm one of those people that doesn't like to live with uncertainty. So I remember growing up with my friends, I would say things like, when we're now old and grey and we're sat back and we're telling our kids about how we enjoyed hip hop and when we used to wear those big baggy jeans, etc. That's no longer a certainty in my mind, you see. And because it's no longer a certainty in my mind, my strategy now, today, as I live, I always think to myself, do you know what? I've got to do everything possible for me to stay healthy until that cure for cancer is found. And I say cure because at the moment, there are treatments to try and rid you of cancer forever, but there isn't really a cure for it if you've, caught it at a time where it's incurable. So facing mortality it's a roller coaster. It's a day-to-day battle. Sometimes I wake up and I think to myself, do you know what, Heather? Not a single person on this earth has got the certainty of tomorrow, isn't it? Could be a terrorist attack, could be an accident, it could be something. So my cancer needn't sit over my shoulder as this looming dark thing. But sometimes I wake up and I think to myself, it isn't fair. It's not fair that I'm living with a disease where I don't know whether I've got 2 or 5 or 10 years left. Do you know what I mean? So it's a journey really, facing mortality, and depending on the day that I wake up, I have a different feeling about it. Yeah.
Have you got things you need to do? You know, I got to do this.
Let me tell you, Ronnie.
Is there things you're ticking off?
There is things I'm ticking off, but the refreshing thing about having the diagnosis, it means that actually the things that I'm ticking off, I don't put off. Yeah, you see what I'm saying? Because a lot of times people have really big plans, don't they? But you think, oh, I might buy my beautiful house. Let me save up. I just do it today. I think this is what I want to do. I have a plan. I have a strategy, and I attack it the same way that I'm attacking the illness. Do you know what I mean?
That's good.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
give us what have you done that you thought, you know, I wouldn't have done that, you know, but I've done this now.
First of all, I went to, and I recommend this a couple of years ago, I went to Essence Festival in New Orleans. It was amazing. It was one of those things that I don't, you watch it on TV, don't you? Especially growing up in the streets of Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, you can never imagine yourself being at one of these American conventions, and I've done that. Last year, I had a dream of selling some beautiful Ugandan handbags, and I did that at a fair. This year, there's a few bits and pieces that I wanna get done. And actually, I'll tell you what, meeting Sheila Gatonye at the African Women's Dinner, that's inspired me to do a few bits and pieces as well. And speaking to, my dad is from Malawi. He's Malawian. He's, I was saying to him, do you think people in Malawi would be receptive to this sort of story? He's absolutely on board. And between now and next year, you watch this space. I'm going to be telling a lot more people about,
you are going to be
disease.
preaching.
Absolutely.
You're going to be preaching it.
I am going to be preaching. Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Okay, now, thank you for that. We'll go back to because we've mentioned Malawi.
Yes.
But you're Zimbabwean, right?
I'm Zimbabwean.
And your dad works in Malawi.
He's Malawian.
Oh, he's
My
Malawian.
mother is Zimbabwean. Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So you're taking your mother's side.
So I take my mother's side.
Mother's
yes.
side. Africans take their dad's side.
So we should. Hey. I am Malawian and Zimbabwean.
Zimbabwe.
Yes,
Okay. So say you were to go back to Malawi right now. How is the information on cancer back in Malawi? Is it something that people just overlook, or is something people actually discussing and talking about?
No, not just Malawi, in Zimbabwe as well, because I've got roots in both places. Cancer is not even on their radar. It's not even. If I went to the rural areas in Malawi and said leukemia, I'm sure people would say to me,
"What's that?
Look, what? What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
imagine
yes,
it's the
sure.
same
In Uganda,
in Uganda as well. It's not even on people's radars, and yet when you are living here, the statistics, I don't know. I think at some point it was 4 in every 10 women are going to get either, if it's not breast cancer, it's cervical cancer. It'll be something. Do you know what I mean? So it's not on the agenda anywhere.
No, it's not.
So yeah.
We have a message for our fellow Africans out there, a message of hope, first of all, and a message of talking and discussing these very important things. So we've done a good discussion on what's happening now. However, what message would you like to put to people out there, especially people, I say black, My
Yeah.
people out there. We're not go, when we say African, we want to incorporate every black,
Everybody. Yeah.
everybody,
Afro-Caribbean.
Afro-Caribbean. It doesn't matter. What we're saying is that, what message do you have for people out there? If you can do us a favor and look
Into the camera.
into this camera here, and just give them a message of hope, a message of discussion, a message of family, just something so people can say, you know what, I am coming out, I'm going to be talking about this.
So, I mean, the message that I would give you is please, please, please look after your health. You are your first. There's a website, WebMD, where you go in, you punch your symptoms, etc. You're the first person. You're your own WebMD, as it were. If you've got any symptoms, anything that you're unsure of, anything that feels uncomfortable, and it's normally the things that are feeling uncomfortable, that are the things that are perhaps, generating a disease, most of which is treatable now. And the thing that I know about disease now is the earlier you get it, the more you can just carry on living life and having treatment. Cancer needn't be something that is taboo or difficult to live with. Cancer really should be managed like your grandmother is managing BP at the moment, isn't it? So it's a pill a day to control your to control your blood pressure. It could be as simple as that. And the other thing that I would say to you is a diagnosis has got no reflection on you as an individual. Some of these things just happen. Some of them are genetic, and you just don't know that you've got the genes. But whatever they are, most of these conditions have already got, a medication in place, protocols in place. Really and truly speaking, it's about being open and honest about how you feel. The thing that I want people to really just focus on is making sure that you're following through any, anything that's a little bit iffy. And I'll tell you what, as well, when you start to talk about these things, when you start to talk about uncomfortable symptoms and things like that, you normally find that you're not the only person that's going through any of these things. You'll normally find that even if it's like an embarrassing symptom, someone somewhere has had it. Yeah, they've suffered it. They've either been through the treatment like myself and can share and can give a good advice, or you can learn about these things and camaraderie, really. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's also important, really, to surround yourself with good friends and good people, and open friends and open people that are open enough to encouraging you to get treatment, etc. I'm very, very skeptical, and it's not the right word, but it's the only word that I have now. Putting everything in God's hands it's a good ethos, but also God gave us the tools and people around us to help with these things as well. So surround yourself with people that are going to encourage you in the right way. Surround yourself with people that are going to point you to the right direction for getting some of this health. I think that's a really important message, actually, amongst us Africans, because sometimes, particularly in terms of disease, I think God helps those that help themselves, in all honesty. And if your legacy is to die of a disease, then what you want to have done is you want to have used all the resources that God has put on this earth. Absolutely. To try and get, yourself better, really. Yeah. I'm not very good at,
No, that is great. We're grateful. Power Chat TV, we've been speaking to
Heather Kaputalamba.
We've been speaking to Heather Kapatalamba. She is going through treatment of cancer right now and surviving.
And you're absolutely right. I am a survivor of cancer.
And surviving and living to
With
tell
it.
the tale.
Yeah.
Would like to encourage people out there, don't suffer in silence. Say for instance you've got cancer but you're like, oh, I'm just going to remain in my home, in my house, and just not go anywhere and just wait to die. No, there are things to do out there. Heather's done lots of things that are just, I hate to make you get out of your comfort zone. Don't stay where you are. Just do it. There's a company called Nike. They've got this thing called Just Do It. Where the hell did they steal it from? You know. So get out from your comfort zone. Absolutely. And get out and do something. Heather, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ronnie.
We are grateful for you coming on Par Chat TV.
Brilliant.
And
Thank
we
you.
shall see you on the next show. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.